Welcome, believers. Welcome, you wonderfully weird people. Welcome to UFO, aliens, and weird stuff. Now, today we are going to be talking about George Knapp, the journalist who followed the UFO rabbit hole. That I think is excellent. I love George, right? But before George Knapp became one of the most recognisable journalists in the UFO world, way before the Bob Lazar story, before Area 51 became almost synonymous with flying saucers, and before Skinwalker Ranch, and of course, long before David Grusch would sit before Congress and talk about alleged secret UAP programs, right, there was a pilot called John Lear. And one day in the late 1980s, John Lear walked into a television newsroom in Las Vegas carrying a stack of documents. And what happened next would change the course of George Knapp's career and perhaps the history of UFO journalism itself. Right, so you've got to picture it, a newsroom in Las Vegas. The newsroom belonged to KLAS TV, and George Knapp was working there as an investigative journalist. Now, at this point, George Knapp wasn't famous for UFOs. In fact, by his own account, he hadn't been particularly interested in the subject, right? But KLAS already had connections to the mysterious world surrounding the Nevada desert. And that connection was the aforementioned John Lear. Now, Lear was an experienced pilot and the son of aviation pioneer William P. Lear, I believe. The jet's named after him, right? Or he designed it, but he was also a controversial figure. And before UFOs became his obsession, Lear had helped George Knapp's colleagues pursue another extraordinary story. And this is important, right? A secret aircraft was supposedly being tested in the Nevada desert. And John Lear helped break the story. An aircraft that was invisible to radar, and at the time, that sounded almost impossible. But luckily, the story turned out to involve the aircraft that would become famous as the F-117 Nighthawk, right? So Lear had credibility with the newsroom. Because that story turned out to be true, they trusted him. So when he returned, he wasn't automatically dismissed as just another stranger with a crazy story. When he walked into the newsroom carrying documents, and according to Knapp's recollection, Lear placed him on the desk of managing editor Ned Day. Now, Lear told Day that he was looking at something enormous. Remember, he's already won the credibility of the news team, right? A UFO cover-up. A story that, if true, could be the biggest story of their career. So Ned Day looked through the material. And then, to be honest, we'd all probably, well, I wouldn't because I believe in it, right? But then he rejected it, right? His reasoning was almost brutally simple. If this was really happening, surely we would already know about it, mate. And you get that all the time, right? You get people going, well, if this was really happening, why is it not on the news? You know, I've heard that so many times. But anyway, I digress, right? Surely he would already know about it. And George Knapp was nearby, luckily for George. So he was listening, right? Watching, being nosy. And when Lear began to leave, George Knapp stopped him. He wanted to see the documents. He was genuinely interested in it. That moment would become the beginning of George Knapp's journey into the UFO mystery. So George Knapp had a television program called On the Record. And rather than simply dismissing Lear's claim, he decided to put him on television. And this is an important moment in our story. And I'm going to show you it. That's the best way, right? So have a look.
Hello and welcome to On the Record. Flying saucers, extraterrestrials, monsters from outer space. The government has been telling us for years that they're not real. They're weather balloons, or swamp gas, or reflections from the sun, or the ravings of lunatics. But serious UFO researchers say a breakthrough may be very close. Some of the government scientists who worked on the top-secret Project Blue Book are ready to talk. What's more, a series of revealing government documents have trickled out of the federal files, documents that paint a much different picture of the UFO phenomenon. One of the most dedicated UFO researchers lives right here in Las Vegas. His name is John Lear, and he is my guest today. Mr. Lear, thanks for being here.
Okay, George.
To begin with, You're a pilot, an airline pilot, captain. You have held 17 different world speed records at one time or another. You're a member of the famous Lear family that all Nevadans are pretty much familiar with, a former state Senate candidate. You don't sound like the kind of guy who would get hooked up in something that a lot of people would say is a bunch of nonsense.
No, it's just by coincidence that I got really interested. This about 2 years ago. My father saw a UFO and my brother did, and they were very interested, but there was really no proof, as far as I was concerned, to really look into it until about 2 years ago.
Your father and brother saw them. Can you give details?
My brother saw one. He was flying a P-38 from Phoenix to Los Angeles at night. It just appeared in front of him. He made two turns, 90-degree turns. It stayed in front of him and then disappeared. And my father was flying at night, I believe, over the Arizona desert, and saw one too.
So you got an interest because of the other members of your family. How did you start out?
I had an interest, but there was really nothing I could put my finger on. And like I say, 2 years ago, a friend of mine came through town. We had flown in Southeast Asia together, and he was retiring from the Air Force. He came over, and we started talking about where he had been for the last 15 years. And he mentioned that he had been stationed at Bentwaters. And I said, oh, Bentwaters, that's where the flying saucer supposedly was in 1980. He said, no, John, not supposedly, it was. He said, I don't care if you believe me or not, it landed. I didn't see it because we were confined to quarters, but I know people who did, and I'll give you the names, and if you ever see them, tell them you know me, and they'll tell you the whole story. Since then, I ran into one of the security police who was within 10 feet of the saucer and actually saw the 3 aliens get out and go up to General Gordon Williams, who was the wing commander at that time.
Now, there was quite a bit of documentation regarding this Bentwater incident. Why don't you go into that a little bit?
There's the Colonel Halt memo that came out under the Freedom of Information Act, and it told about the mysterious lights and beaming down and everything that happened in the forest except the actual alien landings. That wasn't in the memo. And there was also the tape, Colonel Halt tape, forest tape, that he made over a period of 8 hours. And there's a 20-minute segment that we've been able to get a hold of that you can hear him running through the forest and being worried, saying the thing's after us.
Now, why do you suppose that hasn't come out? I mean, this particular incident, why hasn't come out if so many people, and you've told me about this before, have seen it or seen these aliens? Why haven't some of them come forward?
A lot of them have come forward, but they're just not getting any press. It's something that people just don't want to deal with, the press doesn't want to deal with, and people aren't going to listen to something unless Dan Rather or any of your big press people are going to tell them about it. And they're just too spooked. The Air Force has made an art form of ridiculing people who have talked about this thing. They've done an excellent job of covering it up for the last 40 years.
Now, to a modern audience, some of what Lear said sound almost unbelievable. He talked about alleged crashed UFOs. Alleged. Government recovery operations that definitely go on, don't they? Secret technology, extraterrestrial beings, and claims that objects had been recovered and studied. That's probably more the truth. Now, Lear was making enormous claims. And we should be clear about something, right? These claims were just claims. They've never been proven. They were not established facts, and they never will be, but they are facts, I think. Some documents associated with the wider UFO story have been authenticated as genuine government records. Others have been disputed or remain of uncertain origin. And of course, if you watch my channel, you know that is a constant, isn't it? Knapp himself has acknowledged that the material Lear brought into the newsroom included both legitimate documents and material whose origins were a little bit iffy, a little bit questionable. But for George Knapp, the important thing was there was enough to investigate. And this is the thread running through his entire career. This is what I like about George Knapp. It's not that I know this is true, but let's find out. Right? So the interview with Lear opened the door, but Knapp was about to discover that behind the door there was another one and another one and another one, because John Lear wasn't simply talking about UFOs in general. He was talking about something much closer to home. He was talking about the Nevada desert, the secret military installation scattered across it, and a place that would soon become the most famous secret base on Earth. We all know it, gang. Area 51. Now, at the time, Area 51 was already surrounded by secrecy. The government had good reason for keeping the facility hidden. Highly classified aircrafts have been tested there, and the Nevada desert provided enormous stretches of restricted airspace where experimental aviation programs could operate from public view. And let's face it, that is really important. But then the UFO stories began attaching themselves to the place, and George Knapp was listening. Then come another name, I'm sure we all remember it, right? Bob Lazar. I am a massive fan of Bob Lazar. Lazar claimed that he had worked at a secret facility known as S4 near Area 51, and according to Lazar, had been involved in work on mysterious flying crafts that he claimed were not built by humans. And now, George Knapp had something far more significant than a UFO enthusiast telling stories. He had a man claiming to have actually worked inside the secret world. Lazar's first television appearance came under the pseudonym of Dennis. His face was hidden, his identity concealed, and the claims were extraordinary.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs, that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
The live interview with the shadowy Dennis drew international attention. Portions were broadcast by radio in 6 European countries and in a nationally televised TV special in Japan.
Actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs.
Despite numerous inquiries and feelers, Dennis has remained anonymous until now. His real name is Robert Lazar, a young scientist with eclectic interests. The choice of Dennis was an inside joke. He says that's the name of his superior at Groom Lake. It wasn't a joke to Dennis.
He called right after and he said, "Do you have any idea what we're going to do to you now?" And I said, "Well, no." And he hung up the phone.
Lazar's story is by any standards fantastic. He says he's telling it in order to protect himself. He says he was hired to work at an area called S4, which is a few miles south of Groom Lake. At S4, he says, are flying saucers, antimatter reactors, and other working examples of technology that is seemingly beyond human capabilities.
Right, this came from somewhere else. I mean, as bizarre as that is to believe, but I mean, it's there, I saw it. I know what the current state of the art is in physics, and it can't be done.
Checking out Lazar's credentials proved to be a difficult task. He says he earned degrees in physics and electronics, but the schools we contacted say they've never heard of him. He also said he worked as a physicist at Los Alamos National Lab, where he experimented with one of the world's largest particle beam accelerators, a half-mile-long behemoth capable of generating 700 million volts. Los Alamos officials told us they had no records of a Robert Lazar ever working there. They were either mistaken or were lying. A 1982 phone book from the lab lists Lazar right there among the other scientists and technicians. A 1982 clipping from the Los Alamos newspaper profiled Lazar and his interest in jet cars. It, too, mentioned his employment at the lab as a physicist. We called Los Alamos again. An exasperated official told us he still had no records on Lazar. EG&G, which is where Lazar says he was interviewed for the job at S4, also has no records. It's as if someone has made him disappear.
Well, they're trying to make me a non-person.
Explain. You called where?
Well, the schools that I went to, the hospital that I was born at, past job, and essentially nothing comes up with my name in it.
He smiles, but out of futility, knowing the whole thing must sound ridiculous. According to Lazar, his employer was the United States Navy. He says he and other government employees would gather near EG&G, fly to Groom Lake, and then a very few people would get into a bus with blacked out or no windows and drive to S4.
When you get off the bus, what do you see?
It's a very interesting building. It's got a slope of probably about 30 degrees, which are hangar doors. And it has textured paint on it, but it looks like sand. It's made to look like the side of the mountain that it's in, whether it's to disguise it from satellite photographs or what.
He says he was never told exactly what he'd be working on, but figured it had something to do with advanced propulsion. On his first day, he was told to read a series of briefings and immediately realized how advanced the propulsion was.
The power source is an antimatter reactor. They run gravity amplifiers. There's actually two parts to the drive mechanism. It's a bizarre technology. There's no physical hookup between any of the systems in there. They use gravity as a wave, using waveguides, almost like microwaves.
It took a while, Lazar says, before he actually saw one of the flying discs. However, there were hints everywhere.
Right, they had a poster, and it looked like a commercial poster almost, like it was lithographed and you could buy it at a Kmart or something. But they were all over the place, and it had the disc that I coined the term the sport model, was lifted off the ground about 3 feet at area S4 on the dry lake there, and the caption on the bottom said, "They're here." And those are just all over the place.
Later, he got to see the real thing.
When I was let in, it was the first time I saw the sport model in the hangar sitting down, and I was told they could have walked me in the front door, but they purposely wanted to walk me by it. I was told not to say anything and just keep my eyes forward and walk past the disc into the office area. And I did, and as we went by it, I just kind of stuck my hands on it just to run it alongside the thing, and you know, that was about the smallest time. After that, I got to see it actually lift off the ground and operate.
But you also, in between that, you saw more than one.
Yeah. The hangars are all connected together, and there are large bay doors between each one. And there were 9 total that I saw, each one being different. Like they had the assortment pack.
Security at S4 was oppressive, Lazar says, and his superiors used fear and intimidation almost as a brainwashing tool.
It did everything but physically hurt me.
Put a gun to your head?
Yeah.
And said what? Actually put a gun to your head?
Well, they did that even in the original security briefings. They had.
Now, what do you think of that? Do you believe Bob Lazar? I do. I'm going to put myself out there, man. I do believe Bob Lazar. And I do believe the United States, the British government, the Russian government, the Chinese government have all got recovered multiple objects. I do believe that, right? But perhaps the most famous part of Lazar's story concerned an element that at the time had not been officially recognised. And that is, as we all know, element 115. Now, Lazar claimed it was connected to the propulsion system of the UFO. It just so happens years later, element 115 would indeed be synthesized by scientists and eventually named Moscovium. I can't pronounce that. If you watch my channel, you know there's certain words I struggle with. Moscovium. All right, I'll stick it there, right? But that does not prove Lazar's propulsion claims. Oh, I don't know. I think it does a little bit to me, right? But hey, there you go. Now, the existence of element 115 is a scientific fact, though. It's alleged using extraterrestrial propulsion systems, though, remain unverified. Of course it does, right? George Knapp's reporting on Lazar's attracts enormous attention, right? So George Knapp's reporting on Bob Lazar attracted enormous attention, and something extraordinary happened. A place that had been shrouded in secrecy now become part of popular culture, Area 51, right? For millions of people around the world, those two worlds become synonymous with UFOs. Sorry, those two words become synonymous with UFOs, flying saucers, alien government and secrecy, and alleged reverse engineering, Area 51. Now, there is a big rumour that it's not actually there anymore, is it? It's gone somewhere else. You know, and to be fair, if you were the American government, it's probably what you would do, eh? You would just move it, and I think we all know where it is. I can't remember the name of the base though, because you know when you're talking about it, it pops out of your head, doesn't it? Come on. Oh, I'm so gutted. I do know it, but so anyway. Flying saucers, alien governments and secrecy, and alleged reverse engineering. Now, Knapp's reporting helped push the story into the mainstream, but he wasn't simply telling Lazar's story. He was investigating it. Who was Bob Lazar, right? Where had he worked? What could be verified? And that is a good investigator, isn't it? What couldn't? Okay. What did government records show? Right? What did they not show? He's looking into all these details, and these questions created another controversy because Lazar's background became almost as disputed as his UFO claims, and we know that they denied he worked there. Right? He's educational history, his employment history, his alleged work at Los Alamos. His claims about working for government contractors. Supporters saw missing records as a suspicious gap, and later on it proved that it was, because he did work there. Now, skeptics saw contradictions, of course, and Knapp found himself caught in between the two worlds, as any good investigator would, right? The people who believed Lazar completely, and the people who believed none of it. But Knapp kept investigating. And they've got to say, I'm a massive fan, right? And eventually his journey took him somewhere completely different, right? Took him to northern Utah, a remote piece of land in the Utah Basin, a ranch surrounded by stories, unidentified lights, strange objects, unusual animal incidents, reports of creatures, orbs, apparent poltergeist activity, and phenomena that witnesses claim defied conventional explanation. And the property became known as Skinwalker Ranch. Right now, the stories surrounding the ranch attracted the attention of billionaire Robert Bigelow. I know I'm a big fan of him too, to be honest. Bigelow acquired the property and supported investigations into the reported phenomena. Right, so Bigelow acquired the property and supported investigations, or basically paid for them, into the reported phenomena. And George Knapp became deeply involved. He worked with scientists and investigators associated with the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS. The goal was not simply to tell ghost stories. The investigators wanted to understand what was happening. Knapp would later co-author Hunt for the Skinwalker with scientist Colm Kelleher. Right, the book documented the investigations and the extraordinary claims associated with the ranch, and I think I need to buy that and read it. All right, and once again, Knapp was standing at the edge of something that was extremely difficult to explain. So by this time, there was another dimension to him, a government interest, right? For decades, UFO investigators had existed largely outside mainstream government discussions, but that began to change. The military had always encountered unidentified objects. Pilots had reported strange things. Radar operators had recorded things they couldn't immediately identify. But now the subject was being investigated in more formal ways, not secretly swept under the rug and not be allowed to say anything. You know, like normally pilots in the 80s, we know they come out and tell us they stuff, because they definitely do, but they were a little bit scared to do it. So the subject was being investigated in a more formal way, and the terminology itself began changing. And I think that's important, right? UFOs became UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Now, to me, they will always be UFOs. They will always be flying saucers. But there was a certain badge to the word, that deserved a little bit of ridicule, right? So the name was changed to unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP, so you could take it more seriously. So the change in language was more than cosmetic. As we say, it helped move the subject away from flying saucers, and suddenly the conversation involved military pilots, intelligence officers, defense officials, and eventually Congress. Now, you already know the story. We spoke about it a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? But now we're going to look at it from a different angle, because George Knapp wasn't simply reporting on Grusch from a distance. He became part of the story. Before Grusch became publicly known, he approached journalists. I suppose you would, wouldn't you? It makes sense. Among them was George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell. Knapp and Corbell have subsequently discussed their earlier interactions with Grusch and their process that eventually led to his public allegations. And I'll put their pictures there, right? There's Grusch, there's Corbell, and there's Knapp. And suddenly, the journalist who had first entered the UFO world through John Lear was once again sitting across from someone claiming to have knowledge of secret governmental programs. Right? By this time, the world was very different. It was 2023, and the subject was no longer being discussed solely on late night television. it was being discussed in Washington. David Grusch was a former intelligence officer. He had worked in the US intelligence community and became involved with official investigations concerning UAPs. UFOs, flying saucers, right? Then he made extraordinary allegations. Grush claimed he had been told of secret programs involving alleged recovered non-human crafts and attempts to reverse engineer their technology. Now, these allegations immediately became controversial, and they remain allegations. Do they? Do they? They have been public, so they have not been publicly established as fact, and they never will do. You either believe or you don't. Personally, I believe them, right? But somehow, something about the story was different because Grush wasn't presenting himself simply as a UFO enthusiast. He was speaking from his claimed experience inside the intelligence world. And the journalist helping him bring his story into the public conversation was George Knapp. George Knapp, right? July 2023, Washington, D.C. The United States House of Representatives held a public hearing concerning UAPs, and I still cannot believe that happened, right? Three witnesses become central to the hearing, and we know who they were, don't we? Right, former naval pilot David Fravor, and I will do a video on him. Former naval pilot Ryan Graves, and I will definitely do a video on him. And former intelligence officer David Grusch. Now, for anyone who's followed John Knapp's career, this was almost surreal. 34 years earlier, Knapp had been interviewing John Lear. Then, obviously, he interviewed Bob Lazar. Then investigated Area 51. Then Skinwalker Ranch, right? And now a former intelligence officer was testifying before Congress. The UFO mystery has traveled a very, very, very long way from the Nevada desert to Capitol Hill. Now look at the timeline because he's stuck with this, right? 1987, John Lear walks into KLAS TV carrying UFO documents. George Knapp became fascinated by the story. 87 to 88, Knapp interviews Lear on the record.
Basically, what we're dealing with here is, I'll give you the bottom line.
Okay.
I'm not trying to sell it.
I want to hear your thesis.
I'm not trying to sell a book. I'm not trying to promote a lecture. This is based on what I've come across after intense research in the last year. And I have found out that the government has retrieved between 10 and 15 actual flying saucers, 3 of which have been in perfect condition, 1 of which they tried to fly. They have between 30 and 50 alien bodies in cryogenic storage. We even have the name of the person whose job it is to show these bodies to the heads of state and the people who are authorized to see them. They represent at least 5 different civilizations.
I can't imagine a Dan Rather or a Tom Brokaw, if that were to come to their attention, a story of that magnitude, that they wouldn't do something with it.
Well, I can't answer that question. I don't know why they don't do it. There certainly is enough evidence based on what I've looked at. For instance, the Linda Moulton Howe documentary in Denver for the CBS affiliate there called A Strange Harvest. Since 1975 to 1980, when she made the documentary, there's at least 9,000 cattle mutilations. Now, the government said that the mutilations were normal. Your desert predator did these, but they weren't. The mutilations, I think
we have a picture of these somewhere. Maybe we can see that as you're talking.
Lear makes extraordinary claims that UFO government secrecy and alleged recovery technology exists, and I believe it. In '89, Bob Lazar enters the story. A mysterious source known as Dennis claims to have worked at S4. Okay, Knapp begins broadcasting the story. Later in 1989, Lazar appears publicly under his own name. Area 51 becomes a household name. George Knapp. 1990 and beyond, Knapp continues investigating anomalous phenomena. Skinwalker Ranch becomes another major chapter in his work. So he's getting there. He's getting out there. He's investigating. Dave Grusch publicly alleges the existence of secret UAP-related programs involving alleged non-human craft. And George Knapp is once again close to the story. All right, different people, different decades, different evidence, but remarkably similar questions. Are unidentified objects being observed? Does the government know more than it publicly admits? Let me go through that again, right? Are unidentified objects being observed? Yes, they are. Does the government know more than it publicly admits? Yes, it bloody well does. Has unusual material actually been recovered? I believe so. And if so, what are they? That's a question. There is something we need to remember as well, right? A compelling story. It's not necessarily a proven story. I believe it's true. Bob Lazar's claims remain controversial. I believe him. John Lear made extraordinary claims that has never been independently established in their entirety, but I still believe him. Skinwalker Ranch contains a mixture of eyewitness reports, investigations, and unexplained incidents. But unexplained does not automatically mean extraterrestrial. Do you know, on that one, I'm going to agree. I like Skinwalker Ranch. I've watched the new series, and it's remarkably boring, right? But the trouble is, like I says to the missus, you don't want it over sensationalised. You don't want it. You're a typical, I don't know, overexposed story where they throw things in to make you stick around and watch it. The fact that it's boring makes it a little bit more credible to me. They're always throwing rockets up and stuff like that, but there is genuine anomalies there. Are they extraterrestrial? Well, anything that isn't on this planet is technically extraterrestrial, isn't it? So, probably. Right? But anyway, that's just me. And David Grusch allegations, right? Let's get back to that. However significant, remains allegations. I've got to say that. But look, I believe it, right? David Grusch, I totally believe his testimony, right? Why the government are letting him do it, who knows, right? Who knows? There was one bloke on my YouTube channel, and please like, subscribe if you can, right, who said he was a stooge, and I can't disagree with that, right? But still, the UAP thing is getting out there. Washington is talking about it. But, it's never going to make any difference. The Phoenix Lights, right? The Phoenix Lights, right? That was a massive, what we'll call it, 2 football field wide flying saucer floated over the Arizona, over Phoenix, right? Thousands of people saw it. Even that mayor, I don't remember his name, it's a bit of a weird name, right? Even he later came out and said, yeah, I saw it, right? It was there. So many witnesses, and now no one discusses it. It's just another YouTube channel somewhere, right? And that's the trouble with UFOs. Because nobody can prove it, people tend to forget about it or just carry on with their lives. Of course they do, right? So I don't know why I went on a tangent there. But remember, David Grusch, no matter what he says, it's just going to be forgotten eventually. Discovery or disclosure, will never come about. Unless something lands outside Washington, D.C. And then people will say it's blue beam, won't they? Right. Anyway, I'm digressing. So, and David Grush's allegations, however significant, remain allegations. But I believe that personally, this is where George Knapp's role becomes particularly interesting. Because whatever you personally believe, he has spent decades asking the same basic journalistic question. What happened? Who witnessed it? What evidence exists? And what documents exist? Can't argue with those questions. Can the claims be independently verified? And if something cannot be explained, does that mean it's extraterrestrial or just simply unexplained? Yeah, so they are 2 different things, right? So what exactly is George Knapp, do you think? A believer? A skeptic? An investigator? A journalist? Perhaps the answer is all of the above, because I think it is. Knapp has certainly become deeply involved in the UFO subject. But his journey didn't begin because he wanted to prove aliens existed, and that's what I like. It began because of John Lear walked into a newsroom with documents, and instead of simply laughing, Knapp looked. He asked questions because he is an investigator's journalist. Then he put Lear on television. Then came Lazar, like we spoke, then Area 51. So slowly but surely, he was being inundated with these mysteries, right? So he put Lear on television. That's how it first started. Then he found out about Bob Lazar. Then he found out about Area 51. Then he got into the Skinwalker Ranch mystery. Then the modern UAP area, David Grusch. And suddenly, the journalist who once sat in a Las Vegas television studio listening to John Lear was part of a much, much larger story. So what do you think then? What do you think? Right now, the irony is because John Lear was controversial, some of his claims were extraordinary, some were later challenged, some remain impossible to verify. And yet, this is the thing, right? And yet, without John Lear, this wouldn't have started. George Knapp's UFO career may have looked very different, eh? Lear was the spark. John Lear was the thing that ignited George Knapp's passion about the story. George Knapp was the journalist who decided to follow it, and that decision eventually took him through some of the biggest UFO controversies of the last 40 years, which means that if you're watching this documentary and you see that old footage of John Lear sitting opposite a much younger George Knapp, you're looking at something far more than an old UFO interview. You're looking at the beginning of George Knapp's journey. But perhaps that's the strangest thing about the UFO mystery. It never seems to end. One witness leads to another. One document leads to another. One location leads to another. And every answer seems to create another question. But there is something else that makes George Knapp's story different. He's still investigating. He's still into it. Right, after more than 3 decades of following the UFO mystery, George Knapp hasn't simply looked back at the cases that made his name. He's continued travelling the world, following new witnesses, examining new evidence, and investigating cases that remained unexplained. I mean, he even got into the cattle mutilation. In Oregon, he investigated a series of cattle mutilation cases, examining reports of animals being found under bizarre circumstances, and asked them whether there was something far more beyond the controversial explanations. And cattle mutilation, I don't like that, man. Then he travelled to Brazil. There, Knapp investigated the extraordinary Colares UFO cases, where residents in the 1997 reported strange objects and alleged attacks from beams of light. A fascinating story, that one. But he went there and investigated it because he wasn't going to just listen to the story. He wanted to find it for himself. Right, the Brazilian investigation became one of the most fascinating chapters of his recent work, particularly because of the historical military investigation and the large collection of Brazilian UFO records. So he keeps learning. And then there was the Phoenix Lights. I just mentioned that, didn't I? Right, the Phoenix, one of the most famous UFO events in American history. Thousands of people reportedly witnessed strange lights over Arizona in 1997, and decades later, George Knapp was still asking questions about what actually happened that night. He's not letting it die. He revisited the case, pursued new information, and spoke with witnesses as part of his continuing investigation. Think about that, right? John Lear, Bob Lazar, Area 51, Skinwalker Ranch, David Grusch, the cattle mutilation, the Brazilian tuba, right? Sucky, right? The Phoenix Lights, and countless other cases. Different places, of course, right? Different scenarios, different witnesses, but he's learning and learning. Different decades. He's still going on about it to this day. But the same fundamental question, what is really happening? And perhaps that is what makes George Knapp such an interesting figure in the history of UFO investigation. He's not simply someone who investigates UFOs in the past. He is still doing it, still traveling, still interviewing witnesses, still examining evidence. I think we know he's a believer now of everything that he's seen. And that's what fascinates me about George Knapp. When I talk to non-believers, I just look at George Knapp. Right, when he first started, he didn't believe it. Right, he just didn't. But now he does, because there's so much evidence to suggest that everything is true. Right, so still examining evidence, still following leads, still walking into places where answers aren't obvious, and perhaps most importantly, still willing to investigate something without knowing where the investigation will lead, because UFO mystery doesn't provide neat endings. There are no final chapters. There are only more questions. And that's what I find fascinating about the UFO thing. And that's why I like doing this. I like sitting here talking to like-minded people about it, because it's a fascinating subject. You either believe or you don't. Of course, I believe. Of course I do. I'm verging on I'm verging on being mad about it, man. I totally believe in it. Totally believe in it. So look, this was UFO aliens and weird stuff. I really appreciate you sticking around. Like, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you can. That would be great. And I'll catch you next week when we're going to talk about the pilots. All right, we'll stay on the Grusch theme a little bit, if you know what I mean. So anyway, thanks for sticking around, and I'll catch you later.